Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Saturday morning Wednesday study session that remains nameless. It is the unnamed, nameless study session. We're here this morning. We're going to have a shorter session than usual, as we're going to be talking about animals and the Jewish view of animals, as I have to leave in a little bit for a funeral. So we've got a short discussion on something that there's actually a lot about. And the first thing I want to mention is when I'm asked if animals have souls, the correct answer from the Jewish perspective and the reasonably minded perspective is animals do not have souls except for dogs. Dogs are the only animals with souls, because if you say dogs don't have souls, people are not happy about it. And I know my dog had a soul. So Jewishly, no, but there are a lot of specific rules about animals, and there's in-depth discussions. I've had a lot of what they call bar mitzvahs. I've done a lot of, unfortunately, pet funerals, because there's quite a bit. So the most important view of Judaism when it comes to animals is Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim. Cruelty to animals is forbidden. That is the basic rule for all dealings with animals of any kind. Again, if you ever hear it, Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim, cruelty to animals basically is forbidden, cruelty to the animals of life. So that is the basis for the Jewish view. However, there is more than one irony here. The first irony is, of course, that human beings can eat animals. That is legal. There are certain animals traditionally we're not allowed to eat, but animals have been allowed to be part of our dinner table since. Does anybody know who the first person in the Bible to eat an animal was? Noah. Noah was the first person to kill an animal or eat an animal. Up until the point of Noah, it seems we were vegetarians. Adam and Eve were vegetarians. We don't have a record of their children eating animals. We don't have records really of anybody eating animals until after the flood. So there is a belief amongst people in the Jewish world, and the number is actually, I believe, growing, that in order to create a perfect world and get to heaven or make heaven on earth, make Gan Eden part of this planet, is we all have to eventually become vegetarians or vegans in order to get back to, because as we see from the Garden of Eden, Adam was pals with the animals. So he's the one who named them. So they were friends, possibly pets, but really had a good relationship. So eating them at that point in history would have been ridiculous. So what does the Jewish view say then if we're allowed to eat animals? And I think many of us know the view. What is the persuading view on animals that we kill to eat? We have to do it in kosher. Yeah. And what does that mean for the sake of the animal?
Humane manner.
And the humanest manner possible. Now, do we always follow that? Obviously not. We know there's been kosher slaughterhouses in recent years that have been caught doing less than they're supposed to. But the idea is, if you're going to kill an animal, you do it quickly, painlessly. You don't injure the animal while you're doing it. That's why domesticated animals are generally the animals that are eaten by Jews. If you're not domesticated, it makes it very hard for somebody who is keeping strict kosher to eat. Because if you're hunting a deer, for instance, and you prick it or cut it in any way that doesn't kill it with the slitting of the artery, however they do it, it is not kosher. So if an animal is caught in a trap and is pricked, it is not kosher, Jewishly, traditionally. If you shoot an animal with a gun or a bow or an arrow or use a knife in any way beyond the specific way for a shochet, then it is not considered kosher. So the idea is quick, as painless as possible. Obviously, these days with modern technology, we can do even more than before. There are exceptions to the kashrut law for this reason. The most obvious would be the giraffe, in my estimation, because a giraffe should be kosher. It chews its cud and it has split hoofs. Those are the only two requirements for a kosher animal. Split hoofs, regurgitates. The acids do their thing. But why is a giraffe not kosher?
You're on
I
mute.
can't hear you, Stuart. You're on. You may have an answer, but you're on mute.
I could hear him. He said it would be difficult to do.
That is it. That's the reason. It is difficult to do. And the main reason is probably logistics, because you're not allowed to eat the blood. So what you do is you get the animal and you put it on a hook and the blood runs out. What happens with the giraffe though? Your hook has to be way up in the sky for the entire giraffe to be up and the blood coming out. The blood shouldn't be going onto the body. It should be just going out. So a giraffe, although should be kosher in a world of giants, maybe, but in our world, it's not. And that's logistically because of the prohibition we just talked about, Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim. So kill them and treat them as respectfully as. Now, what's interesting is an animal that is going to be butchered for our meal still has the same rights as a pet. Because not only are you supposed to kill them in a certain way, you're supposed to treat them in a certain way while they are alive. So a beast of burden or an animal to eat has the same rights as our pets while they're living. What are those rights specifically? And they are very specific indeed. What are the rules? One is they get the Sabbath off. If you're a beast of burden, you don't work on Sabbath either, or holidays. It is just like the land is given the Sabbath off, so it is. Secondly, and again, I'll add to this, kosher animals and non-kosher animals have the same requirements. The only difference is eating them. Like obviously dogs are not kosher, but they're pets. Cats are not kosher, they're pets. They have the same rights as pigs. It's just you don't eat kosher, you eat kosher, you can eat kosher traditionally, you can't eat non-kosher. That's the only difference comes when eating. Is it a violation to neuter a pet? Yes, generally it is to male pets. That's just one of the strange things it is, but we also know that the responsibility in the modern world changes with the way that pets are treated. And so there are addendums if there's overpopulation as well. That if they're not going to be taken care of, that's how they use the addendum, making it for females. Although again, that can be changed. But generally speaking, you're not supposed to neuter a pet. However, these days, that has changed because of the way the situation is. So again, it's not just about following the law. It's about following common sense as well. So what are the big issues? What about declawing an animal? Or cutting the ears or the tail of an animal for their benefit or for the benefit of their community? That is still a debate because it may cause suffering in the moment, but it may be helpful for the full life. We know neutering and spading will live a longer life. There's no requirement to repopulate the population of animals as there is for human beings. I imagine there is also laws against destroying a species. Like if you were going to say a species that is extinct, we should be neutering them as opposed to, kangaroos or rabbits in Australia, which is a plague. Rabbits in Australia is a major plague because there's no predator, I guess, and they're just everywhere. So even in this world, there are debates as to declawing, as to neutering, as to cutting ears or tails for the benefit. So whereas there are very strict laws when it comes to kosher, there are very strict laws with human beings. With pets, there are some exceptions, as long as you are not breaking the law, Sa'ar Ba'alei Chayim. And again, that is an important one because that is the basis of all laws as there are.
Rabbi,
Go ahead.
I think there's might be a difference between declawing and other kinds of cropping and whatnot, because declawing has an effect on survivability,
Right. That's a good
where
point.
the other things don't.
Now, and again, there's always going to be debate. Declawing an animal that lives only indoors, that might hurt your children or might do damage to itself. I mean, there's a lot of debates in that area. But you're right, declawing, if you declaw an animal that goes outside, you're basically killing it.
I've also observed that Orthodox rarely have pets.
And that's an interesting thing, if that's true. I mean, I don't know. Again, a lot of it probably has to do with the Sabbath and dealing with pets in that way. But there's no prohibition against pets at all. There's prohibition on what you're supposed to do if you have pets. The most obvious is feeding. Animals are supposed to be fed regularly. In fact, they're supposed to be fed before human beings. That is one of the really interesting Jewish laws, is that if you have a pet, you're supposed to feed it before you, kind of like your children, because they are completely up to you.
Is
Rabbi,
that written in the Torah, or is that
The before you, that is a later one. The basic understanding of the laws of pets are found in the Torah, because you have animals. But when it comes to feeding before you, that's not in the Torah. That's a later law. But it's the idea that we owe a responsibility to our animals because they are in our homes, and it's extrapolated from, way we treat our servants and our beasts of burden. So beasts of burden are to be fed regularly, just like animals in the home. They're supposed to be treated in a way that is considered good and logical for that species of animal. Obviously, there are different ways of doing it for different ones. They are beholden to kosher laws as well. You should not be giving your animals unkosher food. And if it's Passover, they should be eating Passover food as well, unless that is not feasible. So don't feed pork to your animals. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, I think an interesting topic that's coming to the limelight now is the use of animals in research. And, a lot of the drug companies obviously use animals in research. I had a long discussion here with a woman who was really upset that they were using a lot of beagles, and that was her favorite dog. And it turns out the beagles have got a similar, they can be bred for a particular, and there are companies, I guess, that breed certain animals. But the most recent thing that we may have to confront is for a while now, I guess we've been using parts of the pig to replace valves in the heart valves, right, in people. And just recently, I think they took an entire pig heart and they transplanted it into a person. He just died the other day. He lived for about several months, I imagine.
24 days.
How many days?
24 days.
24 days. So, I think if those things progress, so then I think it becomes the issue of, if that becomes, let's say, a standard procedure, if you want to use that word for saving a life, what becomes more important now? Killing the animal, a non-kosher animal, in a sense, and using the heart or parts of that animal, as replacement for, in a human being to save a life.
And that is not a debate anymore, really. The debate would be, do you have to eat the animal to save yourself? If you are just placing it in there, it is not considered being consumed. So it is completely legal to. The pig valve is still used a lot. And so that was spoken about years ago as being completely legitimate by most. There's always going to be some that are way far, but generally speaking, any animal used to save a life is. In fact, there are even exceptions to eating kosher rules if it is some sort of pill or something treatment that may have it in it. Some pills may have gelatin in it, would be the best example. So if there's no other alternative to this pill, except for one that has gelatin, which is used in pills, or some sort of dairy supplement, so you have to take it at a time where you may be flacic. So then that's okay. So yes, and you can feed your animals non-kosher food if it is the only thing you're allowed to do. So even though you're supposed to keep them kosher, the rules for animals are a lot more lenient in that way, as long as you're not, hurting them in a way that you shouldn't be hurting them. But again, the idea is to be as strict as possible without putting any issue, not injuring the animals any way they shouldn't be injured. And it's a beautiful way of looking at it. Obviously, not everybody keeps the laws of animals in Jewish world, but, the idea that your pet should be treated the same as your beast of burden is the same as the animal you're eating is really quite interesting and really, really beautiful in a way, strange in another way. Michael.
That might be why the Orthodox don't have a lot of pets, because if you have to give kosher food
That's probably
to a
it.
dog or a cat, that could be very difficult.
Mm.
I imagine in some areas where there are a lot of Jews, I know in Israel, there's certainly a lot of pets, but if the whole country is kosher, it's probably a lot easier to get, kosher animal feed or kosher food for animals. Again,
The offerings at the temple, the sacrificial offerings, the sin offering, and were those specified as kind of what animal it was to be? Because a lot of times you hear of, so many ox and or cattle, and they actually were. And the other thing is in the story of the binding of Isaac. I mean, obviously he finds the in place of Abraham finds the ram, I guess, right? And he sacrifices the ram instead of his son. But it doesn't say anything there about ritual slaughter, right?
The rules of ritual slaughter are not in place at the time of Abraham. Mm-hmm. So they are, that we know of. So they are allowed to sacrifice, but they don't have the specific rules that we will find later. Those rules are given, officially during the time of Moses. So anything that comes before Moses predates those rules. However, there are specific animals that are given for specific sacrifices. However, for every instance, there is a lower level sacrifice that has the same effect. In other words, if it's something that is too expensive and you can't afford to sacrifice a calf or whatever, you go to the next level, which may be a dove. And if you can't afford that, you do grain. So there was always, thank goodness, that kind of understanding that, you do what you can. And
so grain is always an alternative in the sacrifice then? Is it always permitted?
I believe there's always an alternative that you can keep going down.
Okay.
And if not, then it's the responsibility for them to have that animal available for a fee in which somebody, so if it's not allowed, then the community has a responsibility to make sure that everybody can afford, who needs to, whatever the lowest level that is allowed. So that is that. So in other words, that is basically a way to ensure that everybody has the opportunity. Now, when it comes to kosher slaughtering and such forth, we know the rules have become much more specific as we've become much more part of America, especially, and we don't feel like we have to be so separated. The kosher rules of separation have become so, so unlimited. There's so many rules now, because each rabbi has their own. They have slaughtering houses. People have 2 kitchens. Vegetables are considered kosher now. Water can be kosher now. None of this was available before. Obviously, you go to the store and there's 17 different kosher marks and different kosher houses. And so that has become much more 2 different kinds of dishwasher, different sponges, different detergents. There's kosher soap, and you don't put your shampoo unless it's kosher because it might get in the mouth. So there's all these things that's become much more organized for a lot of different reasons. And so it's the same thing for animals. So there's definitely kosher pet food out there, obviously. There's obviously kosher feed out there if you want to use that. Again, the rules, though, for animals and kosher eating are not as stringent as with human beings. But again, because obviously some animals that we eat may eat things that are not kosher. Fish are kosher. Shrimp is not kosher, but fish eat shrimp. Just because a fish eats a shrimp doesn't mean it's not kosher because it ate it, because I can still eat the fish. Same thing. Most of the animals we can eat are don't eat meat on Earth, but there may be exceptions there as well. Think about it. Most of the animals we eat are domesticated or not birds of prey or animals of prey. They're the other type for that one. That's one of the reasons. The main reason for that is the hunting. You don't eat hawks. Some would say it's a bird of prey, mostly probably because you'd have to hunt it. But again, the other is for ease. The domestication of animals makes domesticated animals that much easier to eat. That is why hunting has not been a big Jewish sport in the past, which is ironic because a lot of the fur traders who came to America in the early days were actually Jewish because they were escaping persecution, came to the new land. There was no restrictions, but obviously it was considered illegal to do it Jewishly. Karen, did you want to say something?
I was curious, and I can't remember if we talked about this. I've always wondered why fish were exempt from, well, they're not because of shellfish, but why were chickens, if it's fowl, how did they get lumped in with mammals, let's say, as far as truth?
Yeah, that's a really interesting case. When it comes to birds, there is no specific rule for birds.
I know.
In the Torah. The Torah just lists these animals are kosher. Dove, yes. I forgot what other ones. What are the other bird animals that are kosher in the Bible? Dove is what? Pigeon.
Geese.
I don't remember if geese is in there. I don't remember. Whatever the 7 birds they knew of in Israel, and then they list the ones that are not, which are, the raven, the hawk, the eagle, and so basically the idea was birds of prey, no. Other birds, yes, with some exceptions. But at some point, probably birds became a main source of meal and became kind of what we would say the center of the meal. And so replacing meats that may have been too expensive or not available. And so that may have been why they became part of the kosher section in meat, even though they're not. Again, the meat and cheese thing, could be chicken eat meat. Good point, Jen. That could definitely be true. The cheese and meat also plays a big part in that, because are you going to eat cheese with birds? That's also a huge part. Are you going to separate cheese from birds? Are you eating birds in the same way that you're eating meat? And then it just makes it easier to separate birds from milk if you're doing that division. So are you going to have 4 sets of plate? The bird plates, the meat plates, the parv plates, the dairy. Again, there gets to be too much. So it may have been just for logistics, Larry.
There was
How did the insects get? There were certain insects that are permitted, right, to be eaten.
There are certain insects that are permitted.
How did they sneak in there?
That is something that I am not studied at length because they're gross. But again, it was probably a source of protein for certain groups of Jews at the time. It was probably something that was done at the time that is not done today. So as time goes on, things change and animals change. For instance, lamb. Lamb is a great example for us. In the country we live in, lamb became a rare meat to eat for whatever reason. And chicken became popular, beef became popular, pork became popular. So the big meats that are eaten, chicken, pork, and beef, and then turkeys, of course, on Thanksgiving. Whereas lamb, which was the most popular meat probably in Middle East and still is, became less so. So for us, our eating habits have changed. So this is also what happened over time with probably insects. Over time, it just became, we're not doing that anymore. And also, if you move to another place, insects are probably very different as well. Whereas you are bringing lambs with you and cows, if you have, you bring that with you. You are not bringing insects with you. So that also is one of the issues. I think, except for Karen, maybe, I don't know.
I said not intentionally.
Yes, not intentionally, but they do come. And Jen had some really good points, Genevieve. Chickens are scavengers and they may eat other animals. So that may be one of the reasons. Because chickens are not specifically forbidden or permitted in the Torah because they were not one of the major birds. I don't believe they're in there. I'll have to check that out. But of course, they become the major bird in Eastern Europe and Europe. They become the major bird in America. So that has to be taken into consideration. So that's it. So I'll have to look that up because there's a lot of debate about that. I mean, it's obvious that chickens and cows have always been the best of buddies. They go to the movies together, they hang out together, and that's why. Maybe it was because they were farm animals, because chickens were traditionally part of the farm as well. Whereas and at some point, doves were also domesticated, kept animals as well. Whereas fish and are not. So, but I've got to go. I apologize about the quick, but I hope everybody learned a little bit about and we can talk about this at length later. I'm sorry for shortening it about 20 minutes, but again, it's all Tza'ar Ba'alei Chayim. It's about treating animals with respect. As we see in Proverbs, a righteous man knows the soul of his animal. Even though some say there's no soul. Oh, Genevieve say salmonella could have been an issue. That could have been true too. There may have been some health reasons as well.
Yeah, good point.
But it wasn't because of taste, because apparently pork tastes really good. I haven't had it in 30 or 40 years. I don't even remember I had pork chops. I grew up, they had ham. But where I grew up, I'm from Texas. Pork wasn't that big, but we had ham before I gave it. But I don't know if I think I had pork chops once or twice at my grandmother's house, now that I remember. All right. Or maybe it was lamb chops. No, I think I had lamb chops once or twice at my grandmother's house. All right, guys, I digress. So next week, we will be talking about the Jews of China before World War II. We won't be, if we have time, maybe we'll do the little Shanghai Jews as well. But we're going to talk about, again, the Kaifeng Jews and maybe some of the other Jewish groups. And again, happy Purim, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful time. And again, if you want to watch it, it'll be at 7:30 tonight on our YouTube page or the Zoom. And that's been sent out. It's also on our Facebook. So thank you for joining us with the unnamed Wednesday study. I think we just have a super long name, like unnamed, continually in use for 10 years, Wednesday study session in connection with Mikveh Israel and Sun City and others, and that's the name.
What's the acronym for that?
Yeah, that's right. Karen, you're in charge of the acronym.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
All right, thanks, guys. Sorry again. Stay safe.
No, it's okay.
Bye-bye.